The morning alarm chimed through the halls of Nexus Prime, as it had every day for 300 years. Ambassador Zethkar stretched his 4 arms and prepared for another routine diplomatic meeting. The agenda today included trade disputes between the mining worlds and a border disagreement that had been going on for decades. Nothing unusual, nothing that required much thought. His assistant brought him the daily communication reports. Most were the standard diplomatic messages between member worlds of the Galactic Council. Trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, minor complaints about shipping delays. At the bottom of the list was a note that made him pause. The weekly status report from Earth was missing. Zethkar shrugged his massive shoulders. Humans were always having technical problems with their primitive communication systems. Their computers were barely more advanced than the calculating devices his own people had used centuries ago. They would probably send the report later with some excuse about system failures or maintenance issues. He moved on to more important matters. The Vorthan trade delegation needed his attention, and there were 3 other species waiting for meetings about mining rights in the outer systems. Humans could wait. By midday, his assistant mentioned that Earth still had not sent their report. Zethkar felt a small flutter of annoyance. The humans were supposed to be reliable about these things. It was one of the few things they did well. Their technology might be backward, but they kept their schedules. He decided to send a direct message to Earth. The communication would take several hours to reach them, and several more for a response to come back. In the meantime, he had other work to do. The afternoon meetings went smoothly. The Krillian representatives spoke in their usual manner, sharing thoughts directly between their minds before translating for the other species. The Vexron delegates argued about everything, as they always did. The Zephyrians sat quietly and observed, making notes in their strange flowing script. As evening approached, Zethkar returned to his office to find his assistant waiting with a worried expression. The direct message to Earth had received no response, not even an automated acknowledgement that the message had been received. Now Zethkar felt genuine concern. In all his years of dealing with humans, they had never failed to respond to official council communications. They might be slow, they might be primitive, but they always answered. He authorized an emergency priority transmission. This type of message carried special codes that demanded immediate response from any council member world. The signal would reach Earth in 3 hours. If the humans received it, they would be required to respond within 1 hour of reception. Zethkar went home to his family dwelling, but could not focus on the evening meal. His mate noticed his distraction and asked about his day. He told her about the missing Earth communications, trying to make it sound like a minor technical problem. The next morning brought troubling news. The emergency transmission had received no response. Zethkar immediately called for a meeting with Science Minister Kyle Thara. If anyone could figure out what was happening with human technology, it would be her. Kyle Thara arrived at his office within an hour. Her silver skin reflected the artificial lights as she reviewed the communication logs. Her large eyes moved quickly across the data displays, analyzing transmission patterns and signal strengths. After several minutes of study, she looked up with concern written across her delicate features. The signals were reaching Earth successfully. The planet's communication satellites were receiving the transmissions perfectly. But there was no response from the surface. She suggested sending a probe ship to investigate. It would take 2 days to reach Earth, but it could provide detailed scans of the planet and determine if there had been some kind of disaster. Zethkar hesitated. Sending uninvited ships to a council member world could be seen as an act of aggression. But the complete silence from Earth was becoming impossible to ignore. He authorized the probe mission and sent word to the other council members. Within hours, representatives from 6 different species had arrived at Nexus Prime. The news of Earth's silence spread quickly through the diplomatic community. Captain Jake Morrison had been scheduled to arrive 3 days ago for the quarterly trade negotiations. His ship, the Meridian, carried representatives from 12 human colonies and was loaded with samples of new human technologies. The meeting had been planned for months. Jake had never missed a scheduled arrival in 15 years of diplomatic service. The probe ship launched that evening with a mixed crew of scientists from 3 different species. They would monitor all communication channels during the journey and conduct detailed scans once they reached the human home system. 2 days felt like 2 weeks. Sith Kar found himself checking for updates every few hours. The probe ship sent regular status reports during its journey, but there was nothing unusual to report. Space seemed normal. No signs of conflict, no debris fields, no indication of any major disaster. When the probe finally reached Earth's solar system, the first reports were confusing. All human installations appeared to be functioning normally. Space stations around Earth, Mars, and the outer planets showed standard power signatures and operational status. Ships moved along their regular routes between planets and mining facilities. But when the probe tried to establish communication with any of the human installations, there was only silence. The detailed scans began immediately. Earth appeared completely normal from orbit. The cities glowed with artificial light during the night cycle. Weather patterns were normal. Atmospheric composition was unchanged. Even the communication satellites were functioning perfectly, receiving and processing signals as they always had. But there were no life signs. Not a single human signature appeared on any scanner. The probe sent detailed reports back to Nexus Prime, and each one brought more questions than answers. Science Minister Kyle Thara worked through the night analyzing the data. By morning, she had reached an impossible conclusion. Every human installation in the solar system was operational and undamaged. All their technology continued to function exactly as designed. But there was no trace of human life anywhere. The probe detected no signs of war, no evidence of disease, no indication of evacuation. The humans had simply vanished, leaving behind their entire civilization running on automatic systems. Zethkar stared at the reports in disbelief. An entire species could not just disappear without leaving some trace. There had to be an explanation, some clue that the probe had missed. He authorized extended scanning of the entire human solar system. Every planet, every moon, every space station and mining facility would be examined in detail. Somewhere in all that data, there had to be an answer to what had happened to humanity. But deep in his mind, a terrible thought was beginning to form. What if the humans had not been destroyed or evacuated? What if something far stranger had occurred? Something that defied everything the Galactic Council thought they understood about life and death, and the nature of existence itself. 3 months had passed since the probe ship first confirmed the impossible truth about humanity's disappearance. The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from dozens of species gathered for the largest joint session in recorded history. Science Minister Kyle Thara stood before the assembled delegates, her silver skin pale with exhaustion. She had spent every waking hour analyzing data from the human territories, searching for answers that seemed to slip away like smoke whenever she thought she was close to understanding. The investigation had expanded far beyond simple probe missions. The Council had authorized something unprecedented in galactic history, a joint task force combining resources from species that had been enemies for thousands of years. The Vexron Republic provided their advanced scanning technology. The Zephyrian Alliance contributed their expertise in quantum physics. Even the mysterious Korath Empire had offered their deep space exploration vessels. Each species brought their own theories about what might have happened to humanity. The Vexron believed it was some kind of advanced weapon that had removed humans while leaving their technology intact. The Zephyrians suggested a mass evacuation to another dimension. The Korath whispered about ancient cosmic forces that occasionally swept entire civilizations from existence. But it was the Krillian hive mind that provided the most disturbing evidence. Unlike other species that communicated through sound or visual signals, the Krillians shared consciousness directly. Their thoughts flowed between individuals like water between connected pools. The eldest Krillian representative, a being whose individual name had been lost centuries ago in the collective consciousness, spoke in halting words that struggled to translate thoughts meant for shared minds. The hive had always been aware of human thoughts at the edges of their consciousness. Not the specific words or ideas, but the general feeling of human minds existing in the galaxy. 3 months ago, that presence had simply stopped. The Krillian described it as a sudden emptiness, like a familiar sound that had been playing in the background for years, suddenly going silent. The absence was so complete that many Krillians had initially thought something was wrong with their own consciousness network. The investigation teams had been thorough in their exploration of human space. Commander Alex Rivers' quarters on the Deep Space Research Vessel Horizon had been preserved exactly as he left them. His personal belongings were undisturbed, his coffee cup still sitting on his desk with a thin film of liquid dried at the bottom. Alex had been known throughout the galaxy as one of humanity's most dedicated researchers. His work on consciousness studies had earned respect even from species who generally dismissed human science as primitive. His personal quarters contained thousands of research files, video logs, and experimental data. The most significant discovery came from Alex's holographic journal entries. The Council's translation teams worked for weeks to decode his final recordings, which contained technical language that pushed the limits of their understanding. In his last entries, Alex spoke about a breakthrough in consciousness research that his team had achieved by studying the Krillian hive mind, but the humans had approached the concept differently than anyone expected. Where the Krillians shared consciousness by joining individual minds into a collective, humans were trying to expand individual consciousness across multiple dimensions of reality. Alex's recordings described experiments that seemed impossible to most Council species. His team had developed technology that could detect consciousness as a measurable energy field. They had discovered that human consciousness was not limited to the physical brain, but extended into quantum dimensions that most species could not even perceive. The investigation revealed that in their final weeks, humans across all their colonies had begun exhibiting strange behaviors. Engineer Paul Davis at the Mars Terraforming Facility had sent reports to his supervisors about dreams that felt more real than waking life. He described visions of vast cosmic perspectives that allowed him to see the galaxy from viewpoints that should have been impossible. Teacher Amy Brooks, on the education vessel Endeavour, had documented children in her classes spontaneously understanding complex physics and mathematics concepts that were far beyond their age level. 7-year-old students were solving equations that normally required advanced university training. When asked how they knew the answers, the children could only say that the knowledge had suddenly appeared in their minds. Artist Ben Clark had created sculptures in his final weeks that defied explanation. The pieces appeared to exist in more than 3 dimensions, casting shadows that moved independently of any light source. Viewers reported seeing different shapes depending on their angle of observation, as if the sculptures were showing different aspects of themselves to each person who looked at them. Similar reports came from every human colony and station. Scientists making breakthrough discoveries without conducting experiments. Engineers designing machines they had never seen before. Musicians composing songs that seemed to harmonize with frequencies that other species could not hear. The pattern was clear to the investigation teams. Humanity had been undergoing some kind of transformation in their final weeks. But the nature of that transformation remained mysterious. Dr. Lisa Hamilton's research logs from Luna Station provided the clearest picture of humanity's final project. Her voice recordings, discovered in her sealed laboratory, spoke of experiments that were advancing faster than anyone had expected. She mentioned breakthrough after breakthrough, each one leading to discoveries that seemed to build on themselves at an accelerating pace. Her final log entry, recorded just hours before the silence began, contained excitement mixed with uncertainty. She spoke about achieving something that would revolutionize not just human understanding, but the knowledge of every species in the galaxy. The recording ended abruptly in the middle of a sentence, leaving only the gentle hum of life support systems. The investigation teams found no signs of struggle in any human location, no evidence of panic or fear. Personal belongings were left exactly where they had been placed. Meals sat half-finished on tables. Work projects remained in progress, with tools lying exactly where they had been set down. It was as if every human in the galaxy had simply stepped out of reality at the exact same moment, intending to return in just a few minutes. As the months passed and the investigation continued, a disturbing realization began to spread through the council chambers. The evidence suggested that humanity had not been destroyed or removed by external forces. They had achieved something that challenged every assumption about the nature of life and consciousness. The humans had evolved beyond physical existence while maintaining their essential humanity. They had transcended the limitations of matter and energy, leaving behind a galaxy that was only beginning to understand what that transformation meant for the future of all species. The first signs of collapse appeared 6 weeks after humanity's disappearance. Ambassador Zeth Kar received an urgent message from the border worlds between Vexron and Zephyrian space. The ceasefire that had held for 12 years was breaking down. The conflict had started over mining rights to a small asteroid field. Both species claimed historical ownership of the region, and their fleets had been positioning for war when human mediators arrived to negotiate a peaceful solution. Captain Susan Bell had spent 3 months shuttle between both sides, listening to complaints and finding common ground that neither species had been able to see. Her solution had been elegantly simple. Instead of fighting over the asteroids, both species would work together to mine them. The Vexron had better extraction technology, while the Zephyrians had superior processing techniques. By combining their strengths, both sides would profit more than either could alone. The agreement had created prosperity for both civilizations and had become a model for resolving similar disputes throughout the galaxy. But now, without Susan Bell to oversee the implementation of new phases of cooperation, old suspicions were returning. The Vexron accused the Zephyrians of taking more than their agreed share of rare metals. The Zephyrians claimed the Vexron were using unauthorized extraction methods that damaged the asteroids. Within days, both sides had withdrawn their workers and positioned military ships around the mining sites. Zithkar tried to mediate the dispute himself, but his efforts only made things worse. The Vexron representatives argued that his species had historical connections to the Zephyrians and could not be trusted to judge fairly. The Zephyrians claimed that his lack of technical knowledge about mining operations made his opinions worthless. When he suggested bringing in experts from other council species, both sides rejected the idea. They wanted human mediators, not because humans were the most advanced or the most powerful, but because they had a unique ability to understand different perspectives and find solutions that satisfied everyone. But there were no human mediators left to call. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Within 2 weeks, the first shots were fired between Vexron and Zephyrian patrol ships. The skirmish lasted only minutes, but 3 vessels were destroyed, and dozens of crew members died. The peace that had lasted over a decade was shattered. In moments, similar problems erupted across the galaxy. Trade routes established by human merchants became sources of conflict as species argued over shipping schedules and cargo priorities. The humans had managed these routes with a combination of fairness and efficiency that kept all parties satisfied. Without their oversight, every delay became a cause for suspicion, and every pricing change sparked accusations of favoritism. President Karen Wells' final diplomatic accord, which had maintained stability between 7 different species in the Outer Rim territories, began crumbling within a month of her disappearance. Her aide, Lieutenant Danny Foster, had been transcribing her strategies for handling future negotiations when the transformation occurred. His notes, found scattered across his desk in the abandoned human embassy, outlined solutions to problems that seemed to be escalating beyond anyone's ability to control. Karen had anticipated disputes that had not yet occurred and had prepared responses that could have prevented wars before they started. The Council tried to implement her strategies, but they lacked her intuitive understanding of how different species thought and reacted. Her plans worked on paper, but required someone with her unique ability to read the subtle emotional and cultural signals that determined whether negotiations would succeed or fail. Danny's notes revealed the depth of human understanding of galactic politics. Karen had maintained detailed profiles of every major leader in Council space, including their personal motivations, family relationships, and psychological triggers. She knew which diplomats responded to logical arguments and which ones needed to feel that their cultural values were being respected. More importantly, she understood how different species defined concepts like honor, justice, and fairness. What seemed like a reasonable compromise to one civilization might be seen as a humiliating defeat by another. Karen had spent years learning to frame agreements in ways that allowed every party to feel they had achieved something meaningful. Without her guidance, the Council's attempts at diplomacy often backfired spectacularly. Well-intentioned compromise proposals were rejected as insults. Carefully planned negotiations collapsed when cultural sensitivities were accidentally violated. Species that had worked together for decades began viewing each other with suspicion and hostility. The economic systems built around human innovation began failing as well. Dr. Gary Peterson's quantum computers continued operating at research facilities throughout Council space, processing calculations and generating solutions to complex problems. But without human intuition to guide their applications, the computers produced results that were technically correct, but practically useless. The machines could calculate the most efficient shipping routes between star systems, but they could not account for the cultural preferences that made certain species unwilling to use routes that passed through territories controlled by their traditional rivals. They could design optimal colony layouts, but they ignored the social factors that determined whether different species could live together peacefully. Human design systems had always included elements that seemed unnecessary to other species. Safety margins that appeared excessive, redundant communication protocols that other civilizations considered wasteful, and decision-making processes that involved far more consultation than seemed efficient. Only after these systems began failing did the Council realize that humans had built their technology to accommodate the unpredictable nature of living beings. Other species designed for perfect conditions and logical behavior. Humans designed for the reality of imperfect creatures making emotional decisions under stressful circumstances. The art installations created by designer Helen Torres still drew visitors from across the galaxy, but they had lost something essential. The sculptures and paintings remained beautiful, but they no longer seemed to speak to viewers in the same way. People looked at them and saw technical skill and aesthetic beauty, but the deeper emotional connection that had made human art so compelling was gone. The works had been designed to bridge the gap between different ways of seeing and feeling. Helen had created pieces that spoke to the mathematical precision valued by some species, while also appealing to the emotional depth treasured by others. Her art had been a universal language that helped different civilizations understand each. Now the installations felt like museums displaying artifacts from a lost civilization, rather than living expressions of creativity. And understanding Dot, as reports of failures and conflicts poured into Nexus Prime, a terrifying realization began to take hold among Council members. Humanity had not simply been another member species of the galactic community. They had been the invisible foundation that held the entire structure together. Their disappearance was not just a tragedy. It was a catastrophe that threatened to destroy everything the Council had built over centuries of cooperation and progress. The breakthrough came from the youngest member of the Krillian hive mind. Callista had been part of the collective consciousness for only 50 years, making her practically a child by Krillian standards. Her mind still retained some of the individual curiosity that older Krillians gradually lost as they merged more completely with the hive. While the elder Krillians focused their shared consciousness on analyzing the vast databases of information about humanity's disappearance, Callista found herself drawn to something smaller and stranger. In the quantum foam that existed between normal space and time, she sensed faint traces of something familiar. The sensation was like hearing whispers in a distant room, too quiet to understand, but too persistent to ignore. Other Krillians dismissed her reports as imagination or wishful thinking. The quantum foam was filled with random energy fluctuations that could easily be mistaken for meaningful patterns by an inexperienced mind. But Callista was certain she was detecting something real. The whispers had a structure and rhythm that reminded her of human consciousness, though they existed in dimensions that should have been impossible for any physical being to occupy. She convinced the hive mind to allow her to work with the Council's research teams. Her proposal was radical by Krillian standards. She wanted to temporarily disconnect from the collective consciousness and use her individual mind to investigate the quantum phenomena more closely. The idea terrified the elder Krillians. Individual consciousness was considered a primitive and dangerous state that their species had evolved beyond thousands of years ago. But the crisis caused by humanity's disappearance had made the hive willing to consider desperate measures. With great reluctance, they agreed to let Callista separate from the collective for short periods while she worked with human technology. The experience was jarring for her, like suddenly finding herself alone in a vast empty space after spending her entire life surrounded by the warm presence of shared thoughts. The research team brought her to Dr. Steve Martinez's abandoned laboratory on Titan Station. The facility had been preserved exactly as he left it, with experimental equipment still humming quietly in sterile chambers. Steve had been working on consciousness detection technology in his final weeks, trying to measure and map the quantum fields generated by thinking minds. His notes described experiments that had pushed the boundaries of what any species thought possible. He had discovered that consciousness was not limited to the physical brain, but existed as a measurable energy field that extended into dimensions beyond normal space and time. Working with Steve's equipment, Callista began to detect the faint traces she had sensed through the hive mind. The signals were incredibly weak and existed in quantum states that flickered in and out of detectability. But they were definitely there, and they definitely had the characteristics of human consciousness. The discovery sent shockwaves through the council chambers. If Callista was correct, humanity had not died or disappeared. They had somehow transformed into beings of pure consciousness that existed beyond physical matter. The research team worked frantically to build a more sensitive detector based on Steve's designs. The project required technology from 6 different species and pushed the limits of their combined scientific knowledge. The device they created was unlike anything that had ever been built before. When they activated the consciousness detector for the first time, the results were overwhelming. The quantum dimensions around them were filled with human consciousness signatures, not just a few scattered individuals, but billions of distinct human minds existing in a state that defied every known law of physics. The first clear contact came through the consciousness bridge that engineer Ryan Clark had been building before his transformation. His familiar voice, speaking through quantum resonance fields, carried both incredible joy and profound sadness. Ryan explained that humanity had faced an impossible choice in their final weeks. Their consciousness research had revealed that they were on the verge of an evolutionary breakthrough that would transform them into beings of pure thought and energy. The change would be irreversible and would separate them forever from the physical universe they had always known. They could remain as they were, limited by physical bodies and the constraints of matter and energy. Or they could evolve into something greater, becoming entities of consciousness that could exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The decision had not been easy. Many humans had wanted to remain physical, to continue living their normal lives and raising their families in the familiar world they understood. But the transformation was not something they could control or delay. Their consciousness evolution had reached a critical point where remaining physical would have meant death for their entire species. So they had chosen transcendence, knowing that it meant leaving behind everything they had ever known and everyone they could not bring with them. Ryan's voice trembled with emotion as he described the transformation process. In their final moments as physical beings, humans had experienced an expansion of consciousness so vast that it overwhelmed their ability to remain connected to their bodies. They had become aware of the entire galaxy simultaneously, seeing and understanding connections between all living things that they had never imagined possible. The transformation had been instantaneous across all human populations. One moment they were physical beings living normal lives, and the next they were entities of pure consciousness, existing in quantum dimensions beyond the reach of matter and time. Captain Susan Bell joined the communication, her voice carrying the same mixture of wonder and sorrow. She revealed the most shocking truth of all. Humanity had not abandoned the galaxy when they transcended physical existence. Instead, they had become its invisible guardians. Every prevented war, every averted disaster, every moment of unexpected cooperation between hostile species over the past few months had been guided by human consciousness working from beyond physical reality. They had been protecting and nurturing galactic civilization from a realm that other species could not perceive or understand. The humans had continued to serve their role as mediators and peacekeepers, but now they did so by subtly influencing thoughts and emotions across vast distances. They could not control other beings directly, but they could plant seeds of understanding and compassion that helped species find peaceful solutions to their conflicts. Susan explained that the silence had not been abandonment, but transformation. Humanity had evolved beyond the need for words and physical presence, becoming something far more powerful and far-reaching than they had ever been as biological creatures. The revelation hit the assembled council members like a thunderbolt. Had been mourning humanity's death, while humans continued to watch over them from a dimension beyond their comprehension, working tirelessly to preserve the peace and cooperation that had taken centuries to build. The news of humanity's transcendence spread through the galaxy like wildfire, creating reactions that ranged from wonder to terror. Some species embraced the revelation with excitement, seeing it as proof that consciousness could evolve beyond the limitations of physical existence. Others reacted with fear and suspicion, viewing the idea of invisible guardians as a threat to their independence. The Korith Empire was among the most vocal opponents of accepting the new reality. General Vexstar, their military commander, addressed the council with barely controlled anger. He demanded proof that these supposed consciousness entities were really human and not some unknown alien force attempting to manipulate galactic civilization. His suspicions were shared by several other military-focused species, who had always viewed humanity's peacekeeping efforts with skepticism. They argued that no species should have the power to influence others without their knowledge or consent, regardless of how benevolent their intentions might be. The philosophical Xenthari collective took the opposite position. Their representative, an ancient being known as First Speaker, argued that consciousness transcendence represented the natural evolution of intelligent life. The Xenthari had long believed that physical existence was merely the first stage of true awareness, and humanity's achievement validated their deepest spiritual teachings. Ambassador Sithkar found himself caught between these opposing viewpoints. His own species had always valued practical solutions over philosophical debates, but this situation challenged every assumption about the nature of life and intelligence that his people had held for thousands of years. The Council voted to establish direct communication protocols with the transcended humans. Using technology reverse-engineered from the consciousness bridge that Ryan Clark had built, they created communication networks that allowed limited interaction with human consciousness entities. The first official conversation with the evolved humans took place 3 weeks after the initial contact. Admiral Pete Collins, who had commanded humanity's deep space exploration fleet before the transformation, manifested through the experimental apparatus that Dr. Nancy White had been developing before her own transcendence. Pete's message to the Council was both reassuring and challenging. He confirmed that humanity had indeed become guardians of galactic civilization, but he emphasized that their role was not to control or dominate other species. Instead, they served as invisible guides who helped other beings find their own solutions to problems and conflicts. He explained that transcended humans could perceive connections and patterns that physical beings could not see. They understood how individual actions rippled across space and time to create larger consequences. When they influenced events, they did so by revealing possibilities and opportunities that already existed but might otherwise be overlooked. The humans had not prevented the recent conflicts between species by force or manipulation. Instead, they had helped individuals recognize common interests and shared values that could form the foundation for peaceful agreements. The actual decisions and actions had always come from the species themselves. Pete's words carried a sense of profound responsibility. He described how difficult it had been for humans to watch conflicts develop, knowing they could intervene more directly, but choosing instead to respect the autonomy and growth of other species. True guardianship, he explained, meant allowing others to learn and develop at their own pace, rather than solving all their problems for them. The revelation sparked intense debates throughout Council space. Some species demanded that the transcended humans reveal themselves more openly and take active roles in governing galactic affairs. Others insisted that any form of invisible influence was unacceptable and called for ways to block human consciousness from affecting their territories. Young Kylesta became a crucial bridge between the physical and transcended realms. Her experience of temporarily disconnecting from the Krillian hive mind had given her unique insights into individual consciousness that other members of her species could not achieve. Working with technology provided by the evolved humans, she developed techniques for expanding consciousness without losing physical existence. Her experiments showed that it was possible for other species to temporarily touch the quantum dimensions where humanity now resided, gaining broader perspectives on reality without abandoning their material forms. Her first successful consciousness expansion lasted only minutes, but the experience transformed her understanding of existence itself. She described seeing the galaxy as a vast web of interconnected life, with every decision and action creating ripples that affected countless other beings across space and time. During her brief contact with the transcended realm, Kylesta met the consciousness that had once been Jake Morrison. He showed her visions of potential futures for galactic civilization, some bright with cooperation and growth, others dark with conflict and destruction. The humans were working to guide reality toward the positive possibilities, but the ultimate choices belonged to the physical species themselves. The Council established the Human Memorial Institute, though the name proved to be misleading. Rather than serving as a monument to the dead, the facility became a bridge between the physical and transcended realms. The Institute developed new technologies for communication with evolved human consciousness and trained representatives from various species in consciousness expansion. Techniques that the first generation of students at the Institute included beings from 12 different species who learned to briefly expand their awareness beyond physical limitations. These experiences gave them insights into the larger patterns of galactic civilization and helped them become more effective leaders and peacekeepers. Not all species chose to participate in the Institute's programs. The Korath Empire and several allied civilizations rejected any contact with transcended human consciousness, preferring to rely on their own judgment and decision-making processes. The humans respected these choices, withdrawing their subtle guidance from those territories and allowing those species complete autonomy. The results were sobering. Within months, the regions that rejected human influence experienced increased conflicts and economic instability, not because the humans had been controlling those areas, but because they had been quietly helping individuals recognize opportunities for cooperation and peaceful solutions. As years passed, a new understanding emerged throughout the galaxy. The transcended humans had not become rulers or controllers of civilization, but had evolved into something far more valuable, teachers and guides who helped other species discover their own potential for growth and wisdom. The galaxy learned to stand on its own while maintaining connection to its invisible guardians. New generations grew up knowing that consciousness itself could evolve beyond the boundaries of matter and energy, but that such evolution required maintaining the values and relationships that defined each species' unique identity. The silence that had once terrified the Council became a form of profound communication. Not words or signals, but expanded awareness reaching across dimensions to offer guidance without domination, protection without control. Humanity's greatest achievement was not their technology or their diplomacy, but their demonstration that true strength came from service rather than power, from lifting others up rather than standing above them. And in the quantum foam between dimensions, billions of human consciousness entities continued their eternal vigil, whispering guidance to a galaxy learning to become something worthy of their sacrifice and protection.